I mean, some of us know what it's like to feel that our family or friends, don't care about us. They never call. They never come and visit. And how come they don't know by now that you love chocolate? And they don't bring it. Or they bring it when you've decided to eat healthy, and you give them one of those looks that say, "Really?" as you take the chocolate from their hands. I mean, those are friends and families that we can have those kinds of experiences with. Do you ever feel like God doesn't care about you? I mean, does God care about you when you're walking through the lobby here and somebody asks you how you're doing and you're just not sure how to answer? I mean, do you just say fine and move on? Or do they really want to know, and so you actually stop and you start to tell them? And you see maybe their eyes glaze over, or maybe even worse, that they listen to you and then they totally reject you and what you're saying. You wouldn't be alone. In the path where I walk, they've hidden a trap for me. There's no one who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for me. Does God care for you when you are in that deep pit of despair and hopelessness, that you don't know if God cares for you, and you're not even sure if you care whether God cares for you? Because you've asked for help and you didn't get it. And what difference does it make to have a relationship with God? And because unless he's going to change your life around, why bother? Well, you wouldn't be alone in thinking that either. Answer me quickly, O Lord, my spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me, or I shall be like those who go down into the pit. And maybe you aren't sure if God cares about you because you think there's just nothing so special about you that would be worthy of God's attention. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love ceased forever? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in his anger shut up his compassion? People have asked these questions, have poured out their hearts. The 150 or so songs, prayers, poems that are made up the Psalms in our scripture, in our Bibles, are very real reflections of people who throughout history have asked those kinds of questions, have expressed those kinds of feelings about God. Sometimes we can dismiss them and say, well, they're old and they don't have any relevance for our 21st century living. But they're written by humans. And our ancestors felt very much the same kinds of things that we do. They felt joy and sadness. They felt anger and despair. They felt shame and guilt, as well as joy and awe and wonder. They know in those Psalms, as they write and pour their hearts out, how to keep it real. Psalm 139, which we're going to look at today, which is Dwayne's and my favorite one, is often attributed to King David. But whoever wrote it, clearly, they had been through such an experience where they didn't know if God had been there for them. They had gone through something so scary and terrifying that they felt themselves alone in the world. They had traveled down into the deep, dark pit of despair and loneliness and depression and didn't believe that anybody cared enough about them to help them out. And they write this psalm on the other side of this experience as they look back and reflect on everything that happened and realize that even though they didn't necessarily feel it, God had been there and was with them still. And so I just invite you to listen to some of the awe and wonder in this psalm. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down. Listen to the intimacy of these words. and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high that I cannot attain it. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. Hold on to this verse. This is a verse I come back to over and over and over again, because I'm going to be really surprised if there is one of us here who has never felt that kind of deep darkness, despair, and depression, loneliness, the sense that we are by ourselves, that sense that everything is closing in on us. And I come back over and over and over to this verse, because when everything feels like we're alone, when that darkness is there, this assures us that even the darkness is not dark to you, O God. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. There's no place that we need to worry about hiding, no place that we can escape them from that God isn't there. That verse holds me, and I come back to it over and over and over again. It's one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite Psalms. And so if you ever think that there is no one who's caring about you or feeling about what you're going through, if you ever think that there is no light at the bottom of that deep pit that you're in, if you ever feel like you aren't worth knowing, let alone loving, if you ever feel like you're not living up to what you think are other people's expectations of you, or what they have expressed as expectations of you, if you ever feel like that, if anyone ever knew what was going on in your mind, the words that we say to ourselves, the words that we think about others, and hopefully don't say out loud. If anyone ever knew all of those things were going on in us, that they would reject us, that they would want nothing more to do with us. And we can think that God, too, would run away from us. But this is one of the reasons that in my, more sardonic moments, I call this the stalker God psalm. Because there's nowhere we can go that God will leave us. God's already there with us. There is no place we can flee to. You can run, but you can't hide from God. Today I want to share just a few stories of some people. Some of them are very famous. Some of them are everyday, ordinary people just like us, who, if they were standing here today, would be able to say that God has and is and was with them in everything that they've been going through. Did God care about Dietrich Bonhoeffer? He was a pastor and a theologian who was also involved in a failed assassination plot to kill Adolf Hitler. In April 1933, when Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany, Bonhoeffer was one of the first to voice resistance to Hitler's persecution of the Jews. He declared that the church must not simply bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice, but that we are to drive a spoke into the very wheel itself. When the German Christian church tacitly and overtly supported Hitler and his policies, Bonhoeffer, with others, formed what was called the Confessing Church, saying it was Christ who was the head of the church, not Hitler. Bonhoeffer's outspokenness and his actions led to his arrest in 1943, and he was placed at first in a military prison. There, when the details of the assassination plot came out, he was tried and convicted and moved to the concentration camp at Buchenwald. 2 weeks before the camp was liberated by the American army, Bonhoeffer who had just finished leading the Sunday morning service, was taken by the guards and hung to his death. Bonhoeffer had no easy answers to the questions about God and suffering and evil in the world. But we do know that he kept returning to Psalm 139 over and over again. The truth, of course, is that when you are in the pit, when life around you is closing in and not going at all the way that you could even hope or dream of, we can experience that feeling that God isn't there. Shortly before Bonhoeffer died, he wrote this poem, which I want to share with you today as he wrestles with those questions. And the poem is called, Who Am I? Who am I? They often tell me I step out from my cell calm and cheerful and poised like a squire from his manor. Who am I? They often tell me I speak with my guards freely, friendly and clear, as though I was the one in charge. Who am I? They also tell me I bear days of calamity serenely, smiling and proud, like one accustomed to victory. Am I really what others say of me? Or am I only what I know of myself? Restless, yearning, sick, like a caged bird struggling for life breath, as if I were being strangled, starved for colors, for flowers, for bird song, thirsting for kind words, human closeness, shaking with rage at power, lust, and pettiest insult, tossed about, waiting for great things to happen, helplessly fearing for friends so far away, too tired and empty to pray, to think, to work, weary and ready to take my leave of it all. Who am I? This one or the other? Am I this one today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? Before others, a hypocrite, and in my own eyes, a pitiful, whimpering weakling? Or is what remains in me like a defeated army, fleeing in disarray from a victory already won? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Does that sound like the words of a man who was holding on to that presence of God in that Psalm 139 that he studied over and over again? Does it sound like a man who knew that God so passionately cares for him and loves him, that God would never leave him alone to face anything? Well, it does, because of the last line of that poem when he wrote, "Whoever I am, thou knowest me. O God, I am thine. I am yours." What happens when someone sees you as you are, sees you through and through, all your quirks and idiosyncrasies, all your successes and your failures, your strengths and your weaknesses, still loves you, still forgives you, still cares about you, still wants to be with you? Maybe when you experience that, it would be as this woman, Christine Lyons, was able to share with us in a video.
I can't remember if it was the morning Thursday service or the Friday service, but I was
sitting listening to one of the praise songs. It was, the title is called Once Again. And I think it was just being very open to the lyrics and the way that it was being sung by Denise. And I heard a voice that told me, I know your name. And it was the most incredible feeling I had ever felt. And I think up until that point, I hadn't really intentionally had that personal relationship with God. Even though I had prayed and talked to him every day, it was almost like I had been confirmed that he was sitting beside me, holding my hand, and he said, I know your name. It has touched my life in so many ways, just that I know that no matter what I experience in a day, I am not alone. I think it has also opened me to other experiences and encouraging people that I love to also to find Jesus or to go back to church. I don't think that there's any part of my life that hasn't been touched by that experience. And I don't know if that'll ever happen again, where I will hear his voice that way, but I know that it happened once, and that's enough.
Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. Does God know you? And knowing you, does God love you and care for you? There's a cemetery in the Channel Islands in England dedicated to the unknown dead of World War II, where the remains of soldiers have been buried. Nobody knows the names of those soldiers. Nobody knows their date of birth or their date of death. But they believe very strongly that one knows. One knows the names. One knows each one of those soldiers intimately. And so across every grave is written these words: known unto God, known by God. 10 years after her death, the book Come Be My Light, containing some of the writings and diaries of Mother Teresa, the Saint of Calcutta, was released. It came as a shock to most of the world that this Nobel Prize-winning woman, who did so much and inspired so many people, who reflected so much of Jesus' love into the world as she held the hands of lepers and tenderly cared for people dying in the streets. But despite all that she did and showed us, she also lived with a deep, dark depression. And she had for most of her life, and in these words, her relationship with God, this is what she said, that she felt as cold as a block of ice toward God and towards herself. How could that same woman who would so passionately pray for others, Jesus wants me to tell you again how much is the love he has for each one of you beyond all that you can imagine. Not only he loves you even more, he longs for you. He misses you when you don't come close. He thirsts for you. He loves you always, even when you don't feel worthy. And still somehow she could say those words, but still believe and feel, not believe, feel that God didn't care about her and her life and what she was feeling. Brian Kalajic, who is her priest and a director of the Mother Teresa Center, who was tasked with releasing these diaries and letters after her death, said this: to commit herself to becoming an apostle of joy, when humanly speaking she might have felt at the brink of despair, was heroic indeed. She could do so because her joy was rooted in the certitude of the ultimate goodness of God's loving plan for her. And though her faith in this truth did not touch her soul with consolation, so that means like, even though she couldn't feel God with her, couldn't feel God's love and care. She ventured to meet the challenges of life with a smile. Her one lever was her blind trust in God. Because even when she couldn't feel that love, she believed and trusted in that love. Does God care about you? Friends, most of us, or one time or another, will experience those dark nights of the soul. Some of us are in that pit right now. Some of us are going to get news this week that's going to just rock our world, and we're not going to know what to do. But in those moments, when we can feel so totally all alone, that there is no one, let alone God, who cares enough about us to walk with us through whatever it is that we're facing, I want you to know more than anything else that you aren't alone. And even if you don't feel it, that we can learn to trust and believe this. And I want to just give you some anchors as we're coming to a close here, some ways that you can perhaps feel this. When you feel that God doesn't care, know that you're in good company. You aren't alone. That in fact, all through Scripture and as we share stories of our lives, there are people over and over again who didn't feel that God was there, who don't feel that God is there for them. You're not alone. I'm going to move the last one right up to the top one there. Get some sleep. You know, sometimes it's just that we start running and we've got all this stuff going through our minds and we can't get rid of it. And so, you know, I can't push any drugs. Take some Gravol, the non-drowsy kind. But it will help you to get some sleep. And I'm not kidding. The perspective will change. It really, really will. Read Psalm 139. There's 24 verses. I only was able to give you about 13 of them today. Read that psalm. Come back to it again and again and again. Remind yourself of the ways that God's shown up in the past. You know, we're all walking this life together. We're walking this journey together. But there are things that you have already gone through that you didn't think you were going to make it through. And in fact, you have. And you're here today. And so remind yourself of those things when you're feeling alone and that God doesn't care. Let someone else's faith support you. You know what? Sometimes we just can't feel it. We can't even believe it or trust it or anything else. And maybe those are the times when we let someone else come beside us and say, you know what? You may not have the faith for it right now, but I do. And I can be there for you and with you. And just lean into that. Lean into God even more. Do some of those spiritual practices, those things that draw you closer into God's heart. If you've never taken centering prayer, you might want to sign up for the workshop on June 2nd that Sue Willard is leading. It's a way of being present with God. Or take the prayer course that Janet and Jane are going to be offering in July and through into August. Prayer is one of those practices that help us to know and be in that relationship that changes everything. There was a doctor present with Pastor Bonhoeffer just before his death. This is what he said. Through the half-open door in one room of the hut, I saw Pastor Bonhoeffer. Before taking off his prison garb, kneeling on the floor, praying fervently to God. I was most deeply moved by the way this lovable man prayed, so devout and so certain that God heard his prayer. At the place of execution, he again said a short prayer and then climbed the steps of the gallows, brave and composed. His death ensued after a few seconds. And just before they put the noose around his neck, he said, "This is the end, and this is the beginning." Friends, we can all feel like God doesn't care, doesn't love us, wouldn't want to be with us if God knew us really. But I want us to close today just taking a few minutes. making some space for God who is here and in us and moving around us. And so I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes or focus on something that you're comfortable with. And just take a deep breath and let it go. And just take another and let it go. And those lists and things to do that you're going to do and after the service, you've got time. Right now, I just invite you to be fully present. Aware of those feelings, maybe that have grown into barriers and walls between you and God. Just take that breath in and breath out. And create some space in your heart, in your body, in your mind, to just imagine that God knows you, knows your name. Imagine that not only are you in this place, but you are in a place where you feel safe and secure, and that you are sitting there with Jesus right now. And he's looking at you with tender eyes of love. Reminding you that you're not alone. I knew you before you were born. I knit you together in your mother's womb. When you're in that pit of darkness, the darkness is as light to me. I see you. You don't have to hide. You can release that shame and guilt, that fear, that anger. Give it to me. All of you who are carrying heavy burdens. Let my spirit rest in you and give you peace. I know you. I love you. I know you by name. There's nothing you have to hide from me. You are mine. You are mine. I invite you to take that breath in and release it. And another. And release it. And know, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you're in the middle of, no matter what's going to come along and knock you on your butt, you are God's. And he cares. And he loves. And he forgives.